The restaurant was filled with soft music, polished silverware, and the quiet confidence of people who had never worried about the price printed at the bottom of a menu. At the center table by the window sat a couple who seemed to belong perfectly to that world. The man wore an expensive suit, his posture firm, his gestures controlled, the unmistakable presence of someone used to being obeyed. Across from him sat his wife, elegant and serene, her hands resting gently on the tablecloth. Her eyes, however, stared into nothing, unfocused, as if the light around her no longer existed. She was blind, and everyone who knew them knew that no amount of money had been able to change that. They were known in the city. The man was a millionaire, admired and envied, a symbol of success. The woman was often described as graceful and strong, admired for the way she carried her condition with dignity. That night, the dinner was meant to be a small escape, a moment of normalcy in a life that had been shaped by doctors' offices, specialists, and quiet disappointments. The millionaire spoke about business, about investments, about numbers that meant nothing to his wife, except by the tone of his voice. She listened, smiling softly, her head slightly tilted toward him. Then something shifted in the air. A shadow fell across the table. The millionaire looked up, irritation already forming, expecting a waiter or perhaps someone asking for a favor. Instead, he saw a boy. He couldn't have been more than 10 years old. His skin was dark, his clothes worn and too large, as if they had been passed through many hands before reaching his small frame. His shoes were old, barely holding together, and his face carried a mixture of hunger and courage that made people uncomfortable because it could not be ignored. The boy stood there silently for a moment, looking at the food on the table, not with greed, but with a quiet longing. Then he spoke. His voice calm, steady, far too composed for a child who lived on the streets. "Please," he said, "can you give me something to eat?" The millionaire frowned. He was used to beggars, to interruptions, to people wanting something from him. His first instinct was to wave the boy away, to call the manager, to make the problem disappear as quickly as possible. Before he could speak, the boy added something that froze the moment. "Give me food," the boy said, "and I will heal your wife." The words hung in the air like a bad joke, told at the wrong time. The millionaire laughed, short and sharp, the sound of a man who thought he had just been insulted. He asked the boy if this was some kind of trick, if someone had sent him. He said cruel things without raising his voice, reminding the boy that healing did not come from empty promises or dirty hands. He told him his wife was blind, that the best doctors in the world had failed, and that a hungry street child had no place making such claims. The boy did not react with fear or anger. He did not argue. He simply nodded as if he already knew what the answer would be. Then gently, he spoke again. "I will touch her eyes," the boy said, "and she will see." The millionaire stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. People at nearby tables turned to look. His wife reached out, lightly touching his arm, sensing the tension in his body. She whispered his name, asking what was happening. He told her it was nothing, just a child saying foolish things. Yet his voice trembled, betraying something deeper than anger. The boy waited. The millionaire told him to leave. He said he would call security. He said the world did not work that way. The boy looked at the woman then, not at her eyes, but at her face, as if he could already see something no one else could. There was no pity in his expression, only certainty. "I will be outside," the boy said quietly, "if you change your mind." He turned and walked away, small footsteps disappearing into the noise of the street. The food remained untouched. The millionaire sat back down, trying to shake off the strange weight left behind by a child's words. He told himself it was nonsense. And yet, as the night continued, as his wife smiled and spoke and trusted a world she could not see, a single thought refused to leave his mind. What if this was not just hunger speaking? The city outside the restaurant moved on, as if nothing unusual had happened. Cars passed, people laughed, doors opened and closed, and the boy blended into the night, sitting on the cold sidewalk with his back against a wall. He did not beg again. He did not approach other tables. He simply waited, watching the light spill from the restaurant windows onto the street like something warm that never quite reached him. Inside, the millionaire tried to return to his conversation, but his words felt empty. Numbers lost their meaning. The taste of the food was gone. Every few seconds, his eyes drifted toward the entrance, as if expecting to see the boy again. His wife noticed the change immediately. She had learned long ago to read his silences better than his speeches. "You're distracted," she said softly. "Did I do something wrong?" He forced a smile and told her no, that he was just tired. He did not want to worry her with a story that sounded ridiculous even to himself. How could he explain that a homeless child had spoken with more certainty than every doctor they had ever met? How could he admit that, for a brief moment, he had felt something dangerously close to hope? They left the restaurant earlier than planned. As they stepped outside, the cool air brushed against their faces. The millionaire scanned the sidewalk, half expecting the boy to be gone. But he was still there, sitting exactly where he had said he would be, small and still, as if time had not touched him. The wife sensed a presence nearby and turned her head slightly. "Someone's there," she said. The millionaire hesitated. Pride, logic, and fear wrestled inside him. He had built his life on control, and this moment offered none. Still, he spoke. "It's just a child," he said. "A homeless boy." The boy stood up slowly. "I told you I would wait," he said. The millionaire felt a wave of irritation rise again, sharper now because it was mixed with confusion. He asked the boy how he could be so sure of something so impossible. He asked where he had learned such lies. The boy listened patiently, then answered in a way that did not sound rehearsed or clever. "When you have nothing," the boy said, "you learn to see things others don't." The wife turned fully toward the sound of his voice. There was something about it that made her chest tighten, a strange familiarity she could not explain. She asked the boy his name. "Daniel," he replied. She smiled gently. "Are you hungry, Daniel?" "Yes," he said simply. The millionaire reached into his pocket and pulled out some money, holding it out without looking at the boy. "Take this," he said. "Buy yourself food." Daniel did not move. "I didn't ask for money," he said. "I asked for food. From your table." That small detail unsettled the millionaire more than the promise itself. It would have been easier if the boy had accepted the cash and disappeared. Instead, he was asking for something personal, something shared. The millionaire sighed deeply, the sound of a man standing at the edge of his own beliefs. He signaled to the waiter and ordered a meal to go. As they waited, his wife stood silently beside him, her hand resting on his arm. She did not argue. She did not mock the situation. There was a quiet openness in her posture that surprised him. When the food arrived, warm and fragrant, the millionaire handed it to the boy. Daniel accepted it with both hands, as if it were something sacred. He did not eat immediately. Instead, he closed his eyes for a brief moment, whispering words so softly that neither of them could understand. Then he began to eat, slowly, carefully, savoring each bite. As Daniel ate, the wife felt an unexpected warmth spread through her body, starting in her chest and moving outward. She frowned slightly, confused, and mentioned it to her husband. He dismissed it as the cold night air or simple imagination. But unease crept into his voice. When the boy finished, he wiped his hands on his worn shirt and looked up at them. His eyes were calm, serious, far older than his age suggested. "Now," he said, "you must trust me." The millionaire felt his heart pound. Trust was something he gave to contracts, not to children from the streets. He asked what the boy meant, what exactly he planned to do. Daniel looked at the woman. "I will touch her eyes," he repeated. "Only for a moment." The wife inhaled sharply. Doctors had warned her about false hope, about miracles promised by desperate people. And yet something inside her stirred, quiet but firm. She stepped forward before her husband could stop her. "If it means nothing," she said, gently, "then nothing will change." The millionaire wanted to protest, to end this strange encounter, but the words would not come. The city noise faded into the background as Daniel raised his hands slowly, carefully, standing on his toes to reach her face. Just before his fingers touched her eyes, a feeling passed through all three of them, heavy and electric, as if the world itself had paused to watch. And in that suspended moment, none of them realized that everything they believed about power, poverty, and miracles was about to be challenged in a way that could never be undone. Daniel's fingers hovered in the air, so close that the woman could feel the warmth of his skin without being touched. The millionaire's breath caught in his throat. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, reckless, absurd. And yet, he did not move. He could not. It was as if some invisible force had rooted him to the pavement, forcing him to witness whatever was about to happen. Slowly, gently, the boy placed his thumbs over the woman's closed eyelids. The touch was light, almost weightless. There was no dramatic gesture, no sudden movement. Daniel did not chant or raise his voice. He did not look to the sky. He simply stood there, a 10-year-old boy from the streets, his hands steady, his face serious, as if he were performing something as ordinary as tying a shoe. The woman gasped, not loudly, not in fear, but in surprise. A sharp sensation ran through her eyes, not pain, but pressure, followed by a warmth so intense it made her knees weaken. She grabbed her husband's arm instinctively. He felt her fingers tremble. "What's happening?" he asked, panic creeping into his voice. "I don't know," she whispered. "It feels strange." Daniel kept his hands there for a few seconds longer, his lips moving silently. Then he stepped back. "It's done," he said quietly. The word struck the millionaire like a blow. Done. The same word again. The same impossible certainty. Anger flared inside him, mixed with fear. He was about to explode, to accuse the boy of cruelty, of playing with his wife's emotions, when she spoke. "I see light," she said. The world seemed to tilt. The millionaire stared at her, convinced he had misheard. "What did you say?" "I see something," she repeated, her voice shaking now. "It's blurry, but it's there." Tears streamed down her face as she slowly opened her eyes. She blinked rapidly, as if her mind could not process what her eyes were receiving. Shapes formed, then dissolved. Colors bled into one another. She raised a hand in front of her face and cried out, a broken sound between laughter and sobbing. "I can see my hand," she said. "I can see it." The millionaire felt his chest tighten, his heart pounding so violently it hurt. He waved his hand in front of her eyes, desperately needing confirmation. She followed the movement. People on the sidewalk had stopped. Strangers stared. Someone whispered. Another pulled out a phone. The city noise swelled again, but for the couple, everything else disappeared. Daniel stepped back further, already retreating into the background, as if he were not the center of the moment at all. The millionaire turned toward the boy, his voice breaking. He asked how this was possible. He demanded an explanation. He promised money, houses, education, anything. His entire belief system was collapsing in real time, and he needed something solid to hold on to. Daniel shook his head. "I don't need your money," he said. "It was never about that." The woman, still overwhelmed, took a step forward. Her vision was not perfect. Everything was still foggy, unstable, but it was more than she had ever dared to hope for. She looked at the boy's face, really looked at it, memorizing every detail through tears. "Why us?" she asked. "Why me?" Daniel hesitated for the first time. His certainty softened into something almost sad. "Because you would listen," he said. Before either of them could respond, a man from the restaurant called out, asking what was going on. A small crowd was forming now, curiosity turning into excitement. Daniel glanced around, his shoulders tensing. "I have to go," he said. "Wait," the millionaire said urgently. "At least tell me where you live. Let me help you." Daniel met his eyes, and in that look there was something that felt far heavier than childhood should allow. "I live where I can," he replied. "And help is not always what people think it is." He turned and walked away, disappearing between passing cars and shadows, leaving behind a couple trembling on the sidewalk and a question that refused to be answered. He turned and walked away, disappearing between passing cars and shadows, leaving behind a couple trembling on the sidewalk and a question that refused to be answered. That night, doctors would later struggle to explain what had happened. Tests would show changes they could not account for. The woman's sight would continue to improve, slowly, undeniably. The news would call it a medical anomaly, a miracle, a mystery. But the truth was far simpler and far more unsettling, and it would only fully reveal itself when the millionaire finally understood who that hungry 10-year-old boy really was, and what he had given long before he ever asked for food. The days that followed felt unreal, as if reality itself had cracked and everyone was pretending not to notice. The millionaire's world, once perfectly ordered, now moved in slow motion. Hospital. Corridors replaced boardrooms. Doctors spoke in cautious tones, repeating tests, comparing scans taken years apart. They used words like spontaneous recovery and neurological mystery, but none of them sounded convinced by their own explanations. His wife's vision continued to improve. Each morning she could see a little more. Colors sharpened, shapes gained edges, faces slowly emerged from the blur. The first time she clearly recognized her husband's face, she cried for nearly an hour, touching his cheeks as if afraid he might vanish if she blinked too long. He cried too, silently, overwhelmed by gratitude and fear all at once. But joy was not the only emotion growing inside him. There was also guilt. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Daniel's face. Thin, calm, hungry. Walking away into the night with nothing but an empty stomach and a certainty no adult around him possessed. The miracle had happened, yet the boy had disappeared as if he were never meant to stay long. Enough to be thanked. The millionaire began to search. At first it was subtle. He sent drivers through nearby streets. He asked restaurant staff. He spoke to shop owners, security guards, people who lived on corners and noticed things others didn't. Slowly, fragments emerged. Yes, they had seen a boy like that, dark-skinned, around 10. Quiet, polite. He didn't beg aggressively. He never stole. He shared what little food he got with others who had even less. Days turned into weeks. The woman's eyesight improved enough for her to walk without assistance. She insisted on joining the search. She said she needed to see Daniel again, not just to thank him, but to understand. Something about that boy had touched her in a place deeper than her eyes. She felt it in her chest, like a memory she couldn't quite reach. One afternoon, under a bridge on the edge of the city, they found someone who knew him well. An older homeless man, wrapped in layers of worn fabric, nodded when they described Daniel. "Yes," he said. "That boy." The millionaire's heart raced. He asked where Daniel was. The man looked at him for a long moment, then lowered his eyes. "He doesn't stay anywhere long," he said. "But he comes here sometimes, brings food when he can." "Where does he get it?" the woman asked. The man laughed softly, without humor. "From people who least expect to give it." They waited there until sunset. Traffic roared above them. The air smelled of dust and oil. Just as the light began to fade, a familiar small figure appeared at the edge of the bridge, carrying a paper bag. "Daniel," the woman gasped softly. This time she could truly see him. His thin arms, the tiredness behind his calm eyes. She took a step forward, emotion flooding her chest. "Daniel," she called. He stopped. Slowly he turned around. When he saw them, something unreadable crossed his face. Not fear, not surprise, almost resignation. "You can see," he said quietly. "Yes," she replied, her voice breaking. "Because of you." The millionaire stepped forward, unable to hold back any longer. He told the boy everything he had wanted to say that night, about the doctors, the scans, the impossible recovery. He told him he wanted to help, to give him a home, education, safety, anything he desired. Daniel listened without interrupting. When the millionaire finished, Daniel shook his head gently. "You still don't understand," he said. The woman knelt in front of him so their eyes were level. "Then help us." "Understand," she said softly. "Who are you?" For the first time, Daniel looked truly tired. Older than 10, older than anyone in that place. "I am just a boy," he said. "But people only see that when it's convenient." "That's not true," the millionaire said. "I see you." Daniel met his gaze. "You see me now," he replied, "because you needed a miracle." Silence settled between them, heavy and honest. Daniel reached into his bag and pulled out a piece of bread. He broke it in half and handed one piece to the older homeless man nearby. Then he looked back at the couple. "Do you know why I asked for food?" he asked. They shook their heads. "Because hunger reveals hearts," Daniel said. "Money hides them." The woman felt tears rise again. Memories rushed back. The moment at the restaurant. Her husband's hesitation, the boy's calm certainty. Suddenly, pieces began to fit together. "You didn't heal me because you were fed," she whispered. "You healed me because he chose to feed you." Daniel smiled, just a little. "Love moves through actions," he said. "Not words." The millionaire's breath caught. "Then what are you?" he asked quietly. "How could you do what no one else could?" Daniel looked up toward the fading light under the bridge. "Sometimes," he said, "God answers prayers in ways people don't recognize. Sometimes he comes hungry." A chill ran through both of them. Before either could speak again, Daniel stepped back, already fading into the movement of the street. The woman reached out instinctively, but he was already gone, swallowed by the city just as he had been that first night. They never saw him again. But from that day forward, the millionaire changed everything. His restaurants fed anyone who asked. His wealth built shelters, not monuments. And every time his wife looked into a mirror and saw clearly, she remembered the truth revealed at the end of it all. The miracle was never the healing of her eyes. In the weeks after that final encounter beneath the bridge, the millionaire found that he could no longer return to the life he had lived before. Meetings felt hollow, contracts felt meaningless. Every conversation about profit and expansion sounded distant, like echoes from a world he no longer fully belonged to. Something inside him had shifted permanently, and there was no undoing it. His wife's sight continued to improve, steadily and undeniably. Doctors documented every change, filling reports with cautious language and unanswered questions. They spoke of rare neurological pathways, of dormant connections suddenly reactivating, of cases that defied expectations. None of them spoke of miracles, at least not officially, but when they thought no one was listening, some of them whispered. The woman began to notice things she had never seen before, not just colors and shapes, but details people with sight often ignored. The tired eyes of waiters, the way homeless men avoided mirrors, the quiet dignity of women cleaning streets before dawn. Vision, she realized, was not just about the eyes. It was about attention. And attention carried responsibility. She and her husband spoke often about Daniel. At night, when the world was quiet, they replayed every word he had said, every expression on his face, the way he had refused money, the way he had asked only for food, and not just any food, but food given freely, personally. Slowly, painfully, the millionaire began to understand the test he had almost failed. He had fed the boy. Not because he believed, but because he was desperate. And yet, That had been enough. The realization haunted him. He began to walk the city differently, without bodyguards, without announcements. He visited shelters unannounced, sitting quietly among people he would once have passed without seeing. He listened more than he spoke. He learned names, he learned stories, he learned how easy it was to look away, and how hard it was to truly see. One evening, in one of his own restaurants, a young boy approached a table and asked for food. The room went silent. Managers froze, waiting for a signal. The millionaire felt his heart stop for a moment, memories flooding back so vividly it almost hurt. The boy was not Daniel. He was older, taller, but the hunger in his eyes was the same. Before anyone could react, the millionaire stood up, walked to the kitchen himself, and returned with a full plate. He placed it in front of the boy and knelt slightly so their eyes met. "Sit," he said gently. "Eat." The boy hesitated, then obeyed. Nothing miraculous happened that night. No blindness healed, no crowd gathered, and yet the millionaire felt something settle inside him, something right. For the first time, he understood that miracles were not performances. They were patterns, repeated choices, daily acts of humility. His wife watched from across the room, her vision clear enough now to see tears forming in his eyes. She smiled because she knew. She knew that the true healing had not begun with her eyes, but with his heart. They never stopped looking for Daniel. Years passed. Shelters were built. Programs were funded. Schools opened their doors to children who had never imagined a future beyond the street. Some people praised the millionaire, calling him generous, enlightened, redeemed. He accepted none of it. Praise made him uncomfortable. It reminded him too much of the man he used to be. Sometimes, late at night, he would dream of Daniel. Always the same image. The boy. Standing at the edge of light, holding a piece of bread, waiting. One winter evening, long after the story had faded from public memory, the couple hosted a small dinner for volunteers at one of their shelters. Snow fell quietly outside. Laughter filled the room. At the end of the night, as people were leaving, the door opened once more. A young man stood there. He was taller now, stronger. His face was familiar, though older, shaped by time and hardship. His eyes were calm, certain. The millionaire's breath caught. The man smiled. "You fed me," he said softly. The woman stood frozen, her hand pressed to her chest. She could see him clearly now, perfectly, and in that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that it was him. "Daniel," she whispered. The young man nodded, but there was something different in his presence now, something lighter, as if he no longer belonged entirely to the world of hunger and waiting. "I came to see what you did with the miracle," he said. The millionaire's voice trembled. "I tried," he said. "I'm still trying." Daniel looked around the room, at the warmth, at the people, at the food being shared freely. "I know," he said. They wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Where had he been? How had he survived? What was he really? But before any of that could be spoken, Daniel stepped back toward the door. "Remember," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "the world doesn't change because eyes open. It changes because hearts do." And then he was gone. No one saw him leave. The door never opened. There was no sound of footsteps in the snow, only silence. The couple stood there, holding hands, understanding at last. The miracle had not ended the night a blind woman saw again. It had only begun, and it would continue every time someone chose to feed the hungry, not because they expected a miracle in return, but because love, when given freely, is already won. The years that followed carried a quiet weight, the kind that does not press down, but reshapes everything beneath it. Life did not return to what it once was, because it could not. The millionaire no longer measured his days by profits or losses, but by faces, by moments, by the unseen impact of small decisions. His wife, now fully able to see, often said that the greatest shock was not the return of sight, but the realization of how blind the world could be, even with open eyes. They never spoke publicly about Daniel, not fully. The story, when told, was softened, trimmed of its sharpest truths. People preferred explanations they could manage: medical anomalies, psychological shifts, coincidence layered upon coincidence. The couple allowed those versions to exist. Some truths were not meant to be defended. They were meant to be lived. Yet, in the privacy of their home, the memory of that first night remained vivid. The restaurant lights, the untouched plates, the small boy standing between tables of abundance and indifference, the sentence that had, shattered everything. "Give me food and I will heal your wife." Only now did the millionaire understand the depth of it. The request had never been a bargain. It had been a mirror. Daniel had not asked to be believed. He had asked to be fed, not because he lacked food alone, but because the act itself revealed what lived inside the man who held the power to give or deny. The miracle was never triggered by the bread. It was unlocked by the moment compassion overcame pride, even briefly. 1. Evening. Many years later, the millionaire sat alone in one of the shelters his foundation supported. Dinner had ended. The room was quiet except for the soft breathing of those who had finally found rest for the night. He held a piece of bread in his hands, turning it slowly, thoughtfully, as if it carried more meaning than it once had. And perhaps it did. He remembered Daniel's words under the bridge. Sometimes God answers prayers in ways people don't recognize. Sometimes he comes hungry. At Tao, last he understood. The boy had not healed his wife because he possessed power in the way the world defines it. He healed her because he carried presence. He was not sent to impress, but to test. Not to take, but to reveal. The blindness that night had not belonged only to the woman. It had lived comfortably in wealth, certainty, and distance. Her eyes were healed so that his heart could be opened. And Daniel, 10 years old, homeless, invisible to most, had been the final revelation. Not a magician, not a prophet in robes, but a living reminder of an ancient truth the world keeps forgetting, that the divine rarely arrives in forms that flatter human expectations. No thunder, no fire, just a hungry child asking for food. The woman often spoke of the moment Daniel touched her eyes. She said it was not the warmth that changed her, but the gentleness, the absence of ego, the certainty without arrogance. She believed now that sight had returned to her because for the first time she was willing to see beyond herself. They never found records of Daniel. No school enrollment, no hospital history, no trace that fit the systems meant to catalog human lives. It was as if he had passed through the city like a breath, felt deeply but impossible to capture. And maybe that was the point. In time, the couple stopped asking where Daniel had gone. They understood that he had not disappeared. He had multiplied. He was present in every hungry child who approached a table, in every uncomfortable moment when generosity was tested, in every choice between convenience and compassion. The final truth revealed itself not in a single moment, but across a lifetime. The miracle was real. The healing was undeniable. But the greatest revelation was this: God did not come to the restaurant to be worshipped, recognized, or thanked. He came to be fed. And in feeding him, a blind woman learned to see, a powerful man learned to kneel, and a world, just for a moment, was reminded that love often wears the face of the least expected. The story ends there, not because it is finished, but because it continues every time someone chooses to open their hands instead of their doubts, their table instead of their excuses, and their heart instead of their eyes.